Monday morning. Right, continuing with Edward Harrison credit write-downs and the recap of what we've got in the great big macroeconomic picture at the moment. Hi Johnny. Johnny sent me this thing to use a long time ago and I haven't used it, but I've started using it now. It's to draw these kind of little thingy things. So I've used it, and if I find it good, I'll use it more in the future to expand out. But obviously this is going to get confusing. This is why I'm doing a bit of a recap here, because it's to give us a solid grounding on what we've got. Now, I'll just push on. Obviously you can read this and you will have read it by now. Too much debt is our main problem, one of our main problems, but you can't do them all at the same time. So this is one corner of our main problems. Too much debt. The way out of it, as another recap, you can default on your debt, obviously has its problems. You pay it off or you inflate it away. So we've been there, done that. So let's move on to Edward's next three paragraphs entitled Thoughts on Government Debt. Now, there's a lot of good stuff in there. If you want to pause and read it, please do. But I have simplified it down and thrown lots of it away because although I don't disagree with any of it, it is quite confusing. So I've simplified it to just this one, number 3. Austerity, as it is presently conceived, is about reining in government deficits. That's what austerity is, isn't it? They talk about it in the United States and the United Kingdom. They are actually doing it in places like Europe. And generally, when it's talked about, when it's done, the main reasoning for it is to rein in government deficits. Government deficits are too big and they've got to be brought in. And that is government austerity. They're spending less on the people. This essentially means reducing private surpluses. Now, those dots I've cut a lot out, but you can immediately jump to that, but imagine the where things in between. This essentially means reducing private surpluses. They don't have as much money because in general, on average, the public don't have as much money because the government, if they're doing austerity, isn't putting that money in there. Yeah. So, in average, this essentially means reducing private surpluses. It reduces private income, which we can get directly, and induces default. We've got that. Or private cuts in order to meet the still burdensome private debt burden. So, you either default or you cut down on your spending, say at the store, in order to pay your mortgage, your credit card and your car loan. But generally your spending is going down because it's reducing private income. Because there's less income, there's less money flowing into and round through the economy. For the private deleveraging to occur via austerity, what you would need is private saving that occurs as a result of either lower taxes or increased income, the exact opposite of public sector or austerity. In other words, a kind of austerity might be possible, but it's not the austerity that they are doing at the moment. And if they are doing it at the moment, other theys, if they do it, will do it the other way, the way that it's being done now. So we're not going to see increased income or lower taxes. We're going to see decreased income and increased taxes. Yeah? Sorry, that's a habit saying yeah. I'll try and stop it. So, austerity as practice, because what I'm driving at here in these videos is to do a bit of a recap, and we might get to what they should do, but I think the best we'll ever get to is what they probably will do. Now, when a load of governments start doing stuff, the chances are other governments, if they're going to do any stuff like that, are going to do the stuff like the other ones did. They're not very independent thinking things, governments. They just generally go along with what other people have done. They play it safe because, well, they did it. You know, it's really very pathetic. There's not much free thinking going on. So, but it's going to be a good step if we can at least get to work out what might happen in the future. Right, so I've done a little diagram thing of this. You've got, this is the opening diagram, but now in an austerity environment. You've still got the too much debt. Inflate away is just not possible in an austerity environment. It just doesn't happen. There'll be less paying off, so I've shrunk down the triangle, and there will be more defaults. That's just the way of the game. That is currently what's happening in most of the European peripheral countries, and to a certain extent in the United Kingdom, but we must say that in the United Kingdom austerity hasn't really started. Right. Back to Edward Harrison. My views on the spectre of inflation. Central banks are trying to negate the deflationary fiscal tightening now ongoing. Yeah, the overall environment out there is deflationary. There's less money flowing around. There's less people taking out credit. Inflation, you need increases in money and credit to buy a certain amount of goods and services. In the last decade or so, decades, there has been lots of increases in credit being taken out, or debt taken on. That's gone away, so there's less money buying up the goods and services. So the general tendency is for the price of those goods and services to go down, a general deflationary tendency. But their efforts will not be enough. Money printing is a misnomer. We did that yesterday with the helicopter drops thing. For what central banks are doing, as I recently outlined. Fiscal policy prints money by adding net financial assets through deficit spending. Again, this is why I carved the other, because you've got to know Edward's head to understand how he writes things. That's not brilliantly written. Fiscal policy, that's government policy, prints money by adding net financial assets through deficit spending, which is why fiscal policy, government policy, is the route through which deleveraging occurs. That's the way you can get deleveraging, with government spending. As private sector net saves, there's more money coming from the government into the economy, which gives the private sector more ability to save and pay off debts, deleveraging, bring their balance sheets less red. Monetary policy, that's central bank policy, money printing simply alters the composition of private sector assets and therefore distorts the prices of those assets. So it's not putting more money out there, it's just changing the flavour, the colours of the assets that are out there, and at the same time distorts their prices. Remember that bank reserves do not allow banks to make more loans because they are used to target interest rates. We did this a couple of months ago and we went at it for weeks. We know it now, that although the flavours change, the colours change, there's more reserves out there in the real world. That's the real world. On the books of the central bank is not the real world. In the real world, the colours have changed. There's less mortgage-backed securities and treasuries out there, and it's changed for cash. But that cash is just held as reserves in the central bank in outer reality. The central bank's not reality. And that doesn't do anybody any good, because we remember that reserves do not allow banks to make more loans. It makes no difference to the bank's loaning capability at all. We've done it all. Okay. Right, let's finish here with a solid paragraph from Ed. In sum, the problem with central banks' policy is not that it leads to consumer price inflation, except via commodity and food prices. Okay, so we've got central bank policy. We know they're changing the colour of things. It doesn't lead to normal price inflation out there, but commodity prices, because the banks, let's say, have got cash, they don't want to keep it in the outer world of central bank, away from reality. they want to do something a bit more money making from it, so they buy commodities in the outside world, oil or wheat or whatever it might be, which might via the back door come in to the household in CPI inflation, but it's all indirect. Central bank policy is problematic in that it adds a redistribution effect to asset prices that causes asset price inflation in some assets and relative deflation in others. There's distortions going on. Money balances increase, bolstering the demand for assets closely associated with money like government bonds. But as low nominal interest rates and negative real interest rates bite, see, there's the central bank is keeping interest rates down, portfolios shift to alternative asset classes with higher risk profiles like equities. The pension funds are not getting enough in safe assets, so they go up out into less safe assets where they'll get more interest. These alternative asset classes have higher risk profiles like equities, higher yielding bonds, and inflation hedges like commodities and precious metals. What gets lost in the portfolio preference shifts induced by easy money is the relative dearth, lack of, capital available to other assets. Let's say that normal investment money isn't there. Normal investments aren't being made. People are just playing safe and trying to invest as safe as possible, but with the chance of making a bit of money. So you invest in a bit of oil or gold or wheat or something, but you don't invest in Joe Bloggs' factory down the road because that's too dodgy. My view on this is still in flux because I have traditionally seen this from an Austrian perspective. So this is why I'm really hitting it from Edward's perspective, because he's at least got a solid base in Austrian economics. I see central bank money printing as inflationary for asset prices across the board. But the question I now have is more about the second Austrian principle around easy money and the relative inflating of prices and how that distorts capital allocation. On the whole, I will not be concerned with consumer price inflation until we are closer to high capacity utilization, except to the degree asset price inflation feeds into commodity and food prices. So what he's saying is, there's no need for any of this. In his country, the United States, until capacity utilization gets up towards maximum. In other words, when factories are really pumping up and they're really pumping out at full whack and they're looking to maybe increase that, then they'll be increasing their employment. They'll be pulling people in to all sorts of workplaces. Then there will be stress on wages. More people will say, well, you want me to move to your company or you want me to work for you? I want this much more. And what he's saying is there will not be generalized inflation until the workers can demand those wage rises. He notes that the safe investing of this extra liquidity could come into CPI inflation via commodity and food prices. But on the whole, he's not concerned about inflation. Yeah? No, not yet. Good? Yeah. So that's Ed's where we're up to at the moment. And we've still got a little bit to go. We've got outcomes question mark at the bottom, which I'll deal with tomorrow. But that's, I think, a fair balanced view of an overview of what we've got going at the moment. So it's a bit of slow plodding steps, especially for people that know all this sort of stuff, but I think it's important to catch all these things up slowly and move through them slowly. And if you have any comments on them, comments below, and we'll go through them as we're moving through this. But you can see at this pace we're going to take a goodly while to get to where it might get more exciting. and it might never get exciting. Bye.